Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 25th of May 1924, the First World War claims 2 more victims, a couple of titbits on how that war started, Dublin Council is closed down, which is more than can be said for the cocaine trade, and the importance of an apron with the scalloped edge of diamanté band. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. Edward Goschen, who was the British ambassador to Germany at this time of the outbreak of the First World War, has died. More on that later. Also dead this week is General Townsend, the man in charge at the time of the Siege of Kut. There's a murder trial going on. A man is accused of poisoning his lover's pub landlord husband in Byfleet. The accused man is French, which makes one wonder why they're going to the bother of a trial. Another murder case, this time on the south coast, or more accurately the reporting of it, has led to the conviction and fining of the editors of the Manchester Guardian, the Daily Express and the Evening Standard on charges of contempt of court. Empire Day was celebrated this week on May the 24th. The Times celebrated with a 32-page supplement on the Empire exhibition at Wembley. That is the second Times supplement dedicated to the Empire exhibition in less than a month. One Ras Tafari, regent of Abyssinia, as they knew it, Ethiopia as we know it, has arrived in Brussels as part of a European tour. We, as far as we know him at all, know him as Haile Selassie, and yes, he is where Rastafarianism gets its name. Ethiopia is one of 2 independent African states. All of the others have lost their independence. Joining them this week in losing their independence is Dublin Council. This is from Wednesday. The Irish Minister for Local Government has dissolved Dublin Council and appointed commissioners in its place. The news of the Minister's decision has been received with unfeigned relief by the citizens of Dublin, who have been suffering for years through the mismanagement of the corporation. The city rates are among the highest in Europe, the city streets probably are the dirtiest in the British Isles, and the extravagance of the corporation in its dealing with its officials has become notorious throughout Ireland. High taxes, poor services and jobs for the boys in local government. Where have I heard that before? On Thursday, the Times reported the remarks of a Dr. Rollier made at the International Health Conference at Wembley. The effect of the direct action of the air and sun upon the skin was to produce greatly increased resistance to disease. What he appears to be describing is the production of vitamin D. Sometimes you come across an item that illustrates just how much things have changed in the last 100 years. Thursday gave us an example. We print below descriptions of a number of the dresses worn last night at the second of their Majesties' courts. I don't propose to list all of them, they take up half a page, so this one, selected more or less at random, will have to do. Lady Apsley, a white gown entirely embroidered in pearls and diamanté, with a very long draped bodice and the front of the skirt forming an apron with a scalloped edge of diamanté band ending on the right shoulder with a long fringe of pearls and diamanté. Madam Hayward, 6768 New Bond Street. I looked her up, not expecting to find much. While she is married to Lord Apsley, he is not a proper lord. It's another one of those courtesy titles. She will have a hunting accident in 1930 and be paralysed. She will go on to be an advocate for appeasement. When her husband dies during the war, she will fight and win his Bristol seat. How's the war on drugs going? I hear you ask. An article in Wednesday's edition offers us some clues. Bombay drug traffic. Cocaine is coming from Germany, Austria and Japan. What? For starters, surely you would have thought the trade is then as now south to north, from poorer countries to richer ones. And surely to manufacture cocaine you need coca leaves, which only grow in tropical regions. Anyway, cocaine is coming from Germany, Austria and Japan, and wholesale dealers here pay smugglers about £5 an ounce, while their hireling retailers get 5p or 6p per grain. Which means we can do a little calculation. 1 ounce is 437.5 grains. Now the mad metricators amongst you will be saying that this proves the superiority of the metric system. I say it just proves that you need to swat up on your 437.5 times table. Anyway, 5 pence a grain is equivalent to 2,187.5 pence per ounce, which is about £9 an ounce, which is about 2 troy ounces of gold per ounce, which, when you apply the Crozier fudge factor, gives us 1 troy ounce of gold per avoirdupois ounce of cocaine. And how much does it cost today? About £1,000 or £2,000 an ounce, or much the same. So what does this prove? I don't think it says anything about whether the war on drugs is a good thing or a bad thing, but it does seem to suggest that the war on drugs is no more effective now than it was then. Earlier I mentioned the death of Sir Edward Goschen, British ambassador to Germany at the time of the outbreak of the First World War. This is what the Times had to say. Great Britain was going to make war just for a scrap of paper. That final taunt, flung by the German Chancellor von Bethmann-Hollweg at Sir Edward Goschen, the last British ambassador accredited to the Hohenzollern court on August 4, 1914, will ring through history for long ages after the details of the diplomatic crisis which ushered in the Great War will have faded for most people into oblivion. Is that true? It is for me, but then I'm a First World War enthusiast, so to speak. The ambassador to whom they were addressed has died, as we record elsewhere. But the British people will never forget his splendidly dignified rejoinder. If it was, as he wished me to understand, for strategical reasons a matter of life and death to Germany to advance through Belgium and violate the latter's neutrality, so I wished him to understand that it was a matter of life and death for the honour of Great Britain that she should keep her solemn engagement to defend Belgium's neutrality if attacked. I never knew that. Well, I never knew he said it. And I'm far from sure he was right. One of the arguments at the time was whether recognising Belgian neutrality implied an obligation to defend it. When the Austrian ultimatum to Serbia was launched on July 23, 1914, Sir Edward Goschen was on leave in England. He returned at once to Berlin and was met on his arrival by the German government's rejection of Sir Edward Grey's proposal Grey was British Foreign Secretary at the time, to submit the issue to a conference of the great powers. Why did they do that, if they didn't want a war? Of course, the war did happen, and for many it didn't end in 1918. After a search which has extended over 5 months, the body of Major Norman Percival Bailey, who murdered his wife at Hove on December the 7th last, was found at 7:30 yesterday morning floating in the Thames near Tower Bridge. There was a bullet wound in the head, and the state of decomposition of the body points to Major Bailey having shot himself immediately after his mysterious disappearance from London, on the evening of the day on which the crime was committed. It will be recalled that Major Bailey, who was a traveller in motor accessories and had served in the machine gun corps during the war, had been married for 2 years and had lived happily with his wife, whose maiden name was Isabel Marjorie Malkin, in a flat in Hove. On Friday, December the 7th, Mrs. Bailey was found to have been shot and stabbed in bed, and the same morning the husband disappeared. He left the following note on the bed: "I have parted with my dearest possession, and hated to do it. Please forgive me. I did not do it for jealousy or cowardice, but just love. Look for me by the sea." On the same day he came to London and engaged a room at the Golden Cross Hotel, Charing Cross. He had written several letters, extracts from which were read at the inquest. One was addressed to Mrs. Bailey's mother, Mrs. Malkin, of Highfield Avenue, Burslem, and was as follows: "Dearest Ma, to think that I should give you grief. I cannot understand what came over me, as Moki was my absolute and dearest treasure. I shall, in fact, I must, join her. My head is in a whirl." Major Bailey also addressed a note to the Daily Mail at the Hove flat in the words: "I must have gone quite mad. Mrs. Bailey was all the world to me." The Chief Constable of Hove received a letter on the day following the crime bearing the postmark London SE1, in which the writer said: "Dear Chief, I must have been very mad. I had a brainstorm. I woke up in the night with war horrors, and the next thing I knew I was in London. Tell the coroner that financial matters did not affect me." A letter card received by the editor of a Hanley paper and posted in London on December the 7th read: "Dear Mr. Editor, just before I go to joining my dearest Marjorie, I want to ask you to see that we are not wrongly judged. I must have gone completely mad, because my wife was my absolute treasure. The happiest part of my life has been since we were married, and she was a real mate and a comfort. I cannot understand my brain. It is considered that he went straight to the riverside after leaving the hotel and shot himself, and that his body was held down by an obstruction until its discovery yesterday. I prefer to believe that what happened is that something's triggered him to believe he was back in the trenches and under attack. I have heard of similar examples from the time. But how did he manage to both shoot and stab his wife? I can imagine a gun might have been to hand in the bedroom, but a knife? Also note that in the notes he didn't mention war horrors until one of the later notes. Having said that, given that he committed suicide, he was not saying this to beat a murder charge. But as I say, I prefer to believe the war horror explanation. Also, given that the hotel he left was in central London and that he ended up in the river, it seems odd that no one heard the shot. Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.